Okay. Are we live? Yes, we are. Oh, I forgot to change the thumbnail. Just a second, guys. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's episode. Tonight's episode has a very profound personal meaning for me because I feel potentially it could be one of those things, one of those commentaries on our current world that is so crucial to note, so crucial to notice this phenomena occurring. And so the title is The Loneliness That Saw. And so I'll speak about the subtitle, the Terrace of Isolation, in a little bit as the talk develops. But the notion is the loneliness that saw is an idea of certain moments where people find themselves disconnected with the world, and as they find themselves disconnected with the world, they kind of begin to see a sort of design of the conditional state of man's being. The theistic mind, the religious mind, acknowledged that this world is neither heaven and neither hell. Okay? There was this idea. The idea of heaven and hell, it comes from religion. The notion of hell and how it looks like and whatnot is in some sense um, Dante's Inferno had a huge influence in regards to the Christian version of hell that we see in media. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is that this world is neither. So what that means is we must expect chaotic movements in our moment, and we must in some sense expect order, uh, sort of ordered. Data comes to us in chaotic ways, it comes to us in ordered ways. We are a tribal kind of civilization, I guess. These creatures, so if you look at the kind of history, let us say, of how civilization kind of opened its eyes. First, there was the importance of individual survival. As individuals survived, eventually they found an acknowledgement of each other. Eventually, that acknowledgement of each other bloomed into the complexity of communication. Maulana Rumi has this quote where he says, "Let the waters settle, and you shall see the moon and the stars mirrored in your being." Regardless of how important it is that the human being is a social creature or not, it will find itself in moments of isolation, in moments where it will recognize it is left with its own world. When you see people who cannot be alone, they have a sort of fear of being alone, or in some sense, a fear of loneliness, a fear of kind of disconnection. That fear is both wise and yet unnecessary. The manifest aspect of existence, it requires a sort of egoic construct to administer this phenomenology that we are. This egoic construct exists because it chooses itself to be separate. So from this unconscious movement of nature, suddenly consciousness popped out. Suddenly the creatures on this planet could acknowledge they were individuals. They could acknowledge others were individuals. Then for the first time began emerging the notion of collectivity. It took 1 billion years for us to even understand the notion, to become conscious of the notion of a sort of group movement, a group mentality. History, when you go see it, it is exactly that. It is pretty much how human beings formed groups, and then how these groups became very big structures that influenced the next generations that came about. So I find that loneliness in a world where connectivity is valued as a unique viewpoint. It is kind of like in loneliness, one sees the blindness of the artificial connectivity of uh, various human minds. That means I'm not going to lie. I acknowledge an aspect of reality to be simulated, an aspect of reality that creates itself in the moment to be a self. So for me, language is a simulation. It's like a more crystallized version of reality that has been simulated in the domain of free will. So what that means is these words that I'm saying to you right now, these words arise from a sort of freedom of atmosphere where my mind, it's very interesting. Thought will cease to exist at some point, and that which was moving thought will become the observer. So you are right now this object of observance, this objective phenomena. You suddenly have noticed you have free will consciousness, so suddenly you have, in some sense, kind of noticed. Pretty much, the ancient Greeks said the world started from chaos and it's going into levels of order. Okay, the Big Bang Theory, as much as I appreciate the concept and the calibration and the wording of it, which it's a necessary idea for our time, but many of the ideas that we see now, they have ancient roots because we cannot avoid the past as the future take advances. You see, the past cannot be avoided. And what I'm trying to say is that history, reality is a movement. This is something many people don't comprehend, so they become desire bound entities. And it's very hard because civilization has not understood the value of giving efficiency to the human being. Let's say we take two groups of 100 people, and we see that in each group, 50%, let's say, passed the test, 50% didn't. We would in some sense notice a sort of, it's pretty much, it's like this. I find that there's this kind of objective foundation. So the liftoff platform, I entertain a sort of notion that I've kind of developed. I call it the pilots of consciousness. Pretty much all human beings, I see them as advanced communicators and pilots of consciousness. I just see these two categories because the notion of the individual was the preservation of the collective space where that individual had its freedom. So when I say human beings on this planet need to find the love of the species, need to have an inspiration that is the advancement of a vision beyond themselves, you tell me, can lions go help all the lions all over the planet? They cannot. But one human being can create an invention and all of us will use it. Our species has an very unique relationship with itself. We are the most interconnected species in the sense of the members of the species having access to each other's minds and movements and various behaviors. For me, the human being can be considered to be a sort of data recycling phenomena. There have been moments where I have gone in rage, I've entered the mode of anger, as if like there was an airplane mode on your phone. So I suddenly, as if I accidentally went into anger mode. And anger is a state where the inner reality is more convincing than the outer reality. So what you think you see, you believe to be the only truth. Therefore, it doesn't matter how many people speak rationally to the angry person. The angry person is convinced by the data that has hit him. That's the issue of getting offended. This is the issue of kind of people's mind being fragile, not recognizing the importance of how to embrace the challenge of reality. Now, I feel that life oscillates. What that means is it vibrates. It moves from two various ways, two modes. So I can say that when I kind of like we have it's pretty much like a dance of consciousness and unconsciousness. Okay, we are rhythmic, kind of cyclical entities. When we recognize this, we will realize this idea of a new day is kind of strange. How there could be a new day. Do you know? It's just a shift of photons in the space, but in some sense, what I'm trying to say to you is that once you wonder about how the meaning of existence is as instantaneously here as the objectivity, you will kind of notice as if like our mind is an orb, like the Yoga Patanjali Sutras say this, the mind is like a glass orb, and whatever surface it rolls under, it takes that color. Marcus Aurelius caught on to this too. And Marcus Aurelius, in his meditations, he speaks about this. He has this quote where he says, "The soul is dyed with the color of its thoughts." That means the nature of the character is based on what data is available in the attention of that entity. Why do we have messengers? I found it very unique because you don't understand, religion has had such a deep influence on the world that it has introduced the notion of other worlds. It was man's attempt to keep the everlasting, like man, it's like it wasn't just enough to keep our bodies, you know. How can I tell you? It's as if it was an effort for the immortality of the personality of the individual. Religion responded to that sort of fear, urge, and condition in the human mind. When we go look at many religious practices, guys, this is something that the Western world, because it has rejected the whole notion, has not even cared to study the behavioral value of certain religious notions. That means it's very intense because we have to see what is valuable. And what I'm saying is life cannot be governed by one code of man. You know, it's like we have to understand our knowledge, whatever we hold dear to our hearts, even dear to our minds conceptually, it's on a rock in the middle of nowhere. Ta-da! It's as if like the greatest magic trick, the world is hovering in emptiness. And this doesn't mean it's empty. There is something here. There is something here with a design, with a pattern, with a sort of relationship with the change of the world. As if it's kind of like I'm grateful the world changes because in one lifetime the person experiences as many lives as there were moments of change of the notion of self. What I find unique is that when I started giving these Mr. Within talks, I kind of had I had these kind of like I just had this vision that I need to give 10,000 of these talks, okay? And so because I thought, my mind just entertained the notion, and I'm like, okay, if I was to give 10,000 of these, what would I talk about? So I had that sort of playful kind of, I asked that question for myself. Eventually I realized that it's not what I talk about, it's that the world changes eventually. That's the secret, ladies and gentlemen. It's not that the person is creative, it's that this creativity is a dynamic state. And this is what I'm noticing about our intelligence. This is the coolest thing that our civilization is not acknowledging. And strangely, in moments of when I say the loneliness that saw, when I say the terrace of isolation, this is when the person has basked in a personal, like in the truths of their personal dimension. What that means is most people are looking for truth in a world where everything due to time seems to be an effect. So it's as if this world is a simulation if its source is somewhere else, not in this world. So in some sense, the world can be designed in ways where the unknown can sculpt it endlessly. So, what does this mean? What does this mean when we see reality is hovering in emptiness? What do we do with a rock in space with 8 billion intelligent creatures, and the rest of this animals' kingdom is like their intelligence is very dependent on their ecosystem? That was a sort of uniqueness in our evolution, that our attention somehow evolved beyond the system of nature to one that acknowledged itself in nature, separate from nature. You got to be separate from the world to be in the world, or you are simply just the world. Do you see? And you don't understand how much of history is lost. People don't understand this. There is so much of history lost, and in some sense, it's kind of like the design. I have had moments where it's been serene moments in nature. When I was younger, I didn't like to be alone, especially in nature, a lot. I would go to parks, I would go to, like, we had a cottage and whatnot. I would climb mountains and whatnot. I would climb mountains in a day, guys, in one day. And there was all this, like, you cannot avoid the nature of this world. Eventually your eyes will open up to it. It's just how you relate to it that will suggest the destiny of, first, the morality, but then the sphere of alertness and awareness of the species. So think of it this way. Let me see who I could say. Primarily on this planet, there has, I consider, for the, one voice, one author in history has had an ability. His voice has somehow entered the Western mind. When I say the Western mind, it's very interesting, because when you go look at Eastern societies, their greatest priorities are more dictated on discipline and honor. When you see Western societies, it's as if first freedom, and kind of like the freedom is more important than discipline. Do you see? And so this is why, in just a very profound Western theme, is kind of how uh, like how you see a lot of movies where it's just human beings have rioted. This is why when Gandhi did a non-violent kind of protest, people were like, "Wow, this dude just got rid of a lot of violence, like in history." You know? Carl Jung. Carl Jung, I consider him to, in my view, he's a pilot of consciousness. He's a human being who is, his consciousness moved in such an uncommon way compared to many other people. And he was one of the first people. He's such a historic person. I don't think he even realized how important what he did was. Okay, and of course he was not the first, but he was the first for this current civilization. Okay, because history has limits. That means history began at a point where a lot of stuff was happening that wasn't even recorded. Carl Jung, this dude, pretty much made a map towards the unconscious. He is the guy who's primarily known. When I use these words, conscious, unconscious, these are words that in some sense Carl Jung truly brought into light. And what he did in some sense was that he kind of began seeing the subjective self of the being kind of being left in a situation where there are known factors and unknown factors. The unknown factors of intelligence, and especially thought and communication and the various patterns that your just awareness has just not moved through but recorded. Okay, you don't understand how sophisticated your intelligence is. We just don't know how to use it, because the only method is the method of the egoic construct. That's the best way we've found to use thought, to use language, to make language ourselves and then worship that language and be in a loop of belief for a lifetime. Like it's kind of insane, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm telling you what, this is something I kind of said in my other talks where I said we're in an era of idea worship. You know, I when I look at people in society, I'm like, okay, where is their attention going? And I see their attention is going towards an idea. That means their universe has an axis, and that axis is their core value for life. And everybody has a core value for life, and the core value has no story. It's not a value that suddenly comes when there's a heroic transformation, you know? It's it's a sort of in the contentment of a sort of lack of resistance to the design of nature, one suddenly gets access to a new way of nature. I find that this was one thing that I was very, I consider myself in some sense very grateful to the universe that I saw the spirit of nature. Because let me tell you, when Friedrich Nietzsche said God is dead, guess what was next? If God is dead, do you know what that means? That means the notion of a collective natural intelligence no longer is accepted. We you don't understand. There's this story. I find myself often shocked. That's why I share the story, because when I think about this, this is the story of the Tower of Babylon, the Tower of Babel. And so the story is all the human beings on the world, the whole species. Imagine like this 8 billion people that are, just imagine all the human beings in that time, in that story, in the story. What they do is they all gather together. They all gather together and they would all speak the same language. This is such a key point in this story that you must remember. They all spoke the same language. They began building a tower that started to reach higher and higher, and it was eventually reaching the clouds. And their ambition was that all human beings are united under one language, one harmonious, efficient vision of management. They started building this tower this tower to the gods. And so the gods saw this and they're like, yo, these guys are coming up. Oh my God. And so one of them was about to throw lightning to break the tower, and suddenly one of the other gods was like, bro, don't worry, you don't need to throw lightning, let me show you something. And this god, what he did was he suddenly made these human beings speak different languages, and he's like, watch, look at how they're going to create the tower now. And what happens is that human beings can no longer build the Tower of Babel, you know, and it's one of those missing wonders of the world. And so humanity was fragmented, segmented, okay? And because it was segmented, it was in disagreement. It could not align to change. Anywhere your attention is for a long time, you will eventually, whatever you see for a long time, you will care as a value. You will take it as a value. Mysticism is a very sophisticated domain of thought. When I'm speaking, I said it again earlier in this talk, I'm speaking to advanced communicators and pilots of consciousness. That means only listen to these two talks if you can see yourself in those. Only listen to my talks if you see yourself in the context that you're some sort of communication of this universal sector. You're some sort of intelligence. And now this intelligence suddenly, regardless of the vastness of its bubble of knowledge, finds itself in the unknown. And so how Carl Jung said it was that he said there's your consciousness, and then there is the personal unconsciousness. So first consciousness, then there's your personal unconsciousness, then there is the collective unconsciousness. And the collective unconsciousness was his later discovery. And his later discovery, I know how I probably, like, I have a kind of hint how he figured it out. And the reason was he began to see a sort of symmetrical notion. That means it's like, think of it this way. What he's saying with those words is like, you can see inside the room, you can see the the door, okay, and you can see what's outside. You can't see what's outside the room, okay. So what that means is what's in your domain of wakeful attention is your consciousness. So right now, guys, as I'm right now as I'm speaking to you, this is as my, when I went to Rishikesh, India, the teacher said consciousness in such an incredible way where I memorized it. I'm going to repeat it. He said, your consciousness. Like it was something like that. you know? Consciousness. Like it was some next level way of saying the word I'd never heard. But anyways, like your consciousness is this domain of wakeful attention. Uh, right now, for example, me considering my heart is beating, me considering my cardiovascular system, like many different, when you look at when you study the human body, you see the medical sciences is kind of like they have kind of made the body into various systems simultaneously functioning. What this means is immediately there's a lot of, in every branch of knowledge, there is on the unexplored edges of the branches. So think of it this way. I'm going to kind of explain what calling, maybe I should explain it in this way. Um, as I said earlier, there's a sort of objective self and then there's a sort of subjective self. So when I say objective self, a sort of sense of self, a sense of being something, which has an objective, which has form. So you're a life form. When you look at the word life form, it's like life and then form. So there is your objective reality is the form of the world and how the form of the world is being the form of yourself. Okay, that's objective reality. Now, subjective reality is the notion that there is something here, but there is also something else where we have even named it as thought. Okay? The word thought, do you understand? It was a miracle how we found that. Whoever came, like I don't know how, like I don't know the history of how the word thought came about. But I know that it probably, the word probably has to do with like a voice, the personal, like an inner guiding voice, the logos and whatnot. Whew, I'm getting too excited and hence thoughts move too fast. Pretty much what I'm trying to say is there's the conscious. Uh, right now, I know my body is here. Okay. Um, right now I know there's an attention where in this attention there's the thought of me that's here, and the thought of me is not physical in some sense. It's a sort of, I consider imagination to have design, but these designs are an invisible room. That means right now I'm on my balcony and I'm looking at the yard and I could see, imagine like a canoe moving between the trees. That imagination of the canoe is like here, like right now as I kind of shared that, it's here, the notion, the idea of it is here, but its objective existence is not. Do you see? So it's as if the purpose of the evolution of matter was to return to the unknown. We're constantly waving between this. It's like either the self is known or and the world is unknown, or the world is unknown and the self is known, and we're constantly just moving back and forth. I think people who really take academia seriously are going to soon be disappointed because they will begin to see the value of freedom. It's like you don't understand. We can't say there is pure freedom in this world because eventually, due to nature's conditions, the person has to decide something. The decisions made in the moment are kind of expressions of an inner alchemy towards an external. So you see, I am what this is what Mr. Within is kind of saying right now to the world. My dear species, We have defined ourselves too soon and therefore trapped ourselves in a game of ideal worship. Because we trapped ourselves in a game of ideal worship, we first came worshipping the world, and suddenly there were people who broke the idols of man's worship. But we are now in an era where people have not broken the ideas of man's worship. And the ideas of man's worship can only be broken to a depth of a recognition that it's your relationship with ideology's solidity in your experience. So your mind can be in a way right now where it is the silence where all words and all thoughts existed. The easiest, it's very interesting. It's like, this is a ridiculous saying, but it's kind of like the person's like, how do I become the sky? And the person looked at him, it's like very easy, by realizing you already are it. And so it's this notion that you think externally you have to change the conditions in order for your internal to be different. But your inner reality can be free in ways where it recognizes, again, as the Patanjali Yoga Sutra said, that orb. So I'm telling you, there's different kinds of loneliness, guys. A person can be with a group of people, but he can still feel lonely. He can be with his closest friends, he can still feel lonely. Because loneliness has to do with knowledge, with awareness of what is here, which eventually goes down to the old school saying, know thyself. So why do you have to know yourself? Because you have only one lifetime to do it. When else do you have time? 1/3 of our lifetime we're sleeping. Most of the lifetime we're occupied with programs of nature and programs of culture and society, and the stories that we tell ourselves are the bosses of our lives. I find that as if there was a man who found himself at heaven's gate, and a voice told him, all right, you've done good, buddy, you can enter. And so he looked at the voice and he said, I cannot. And the voice was shocked, and so was everybody who had just entered the gate and was looking from outside of heaven, like, yo, this dude's not coming into heaven. And he's told to come into heaven, but he's not coming into heaven. And so this man looks at this voice, the gatekeeper of heaven, let's say, in this playful story. Uh, the man says, I cannot. The gatekeeper says, why? And the man says, because there is something, a promise I have kept in the world. You see, ladies and gentlemen, we are in a love-hate relationship with how our inner experience chooses to validate itself based on its outer, and how the outer experience gives permission for the inner experience to shape it. In some sense, think of it this way. It's as if, like, this is a story which many academics can in some sense appreciate. And if I remember the name correctly, it's from Sir Ken Robinson. Yeah, there we go. Ken Robinson is one of the most awesome speakers I've ever personally seen on YouTube. Like, when I was hearing him speak, it's as if he had already spoken, and it was such, like, I don't know how to tell you. Anyways, Ken Robinson shared this story, and I don't remember exactly if it was with him or it was a story of somebody Ken Robinson knew. But it was this situation where there was this sort of kind of counselor, and there was a kid in class that couldn't stop moving. This kid had too much energy, was just jumping up and down in his chair and kind of like moving everywhere, like, climbing the walls or whatever. Like, this kid had so much energy. Okay? So all the other kids in the class, and even the teacher, was like, okay, this kid is not being still enough for me to teach even the class or to say do anything. So they call the parents of the kid. They take the kid to the guidance counselor of the educational facility, and suddenly the counselor is wise. There, luckily for the parent and the kid, the teacher is wise. And so it's as if this kid, who they were kind of thinking, oh my God, he's so not normal and whatnot, in class he's fidgeting, moving, all this stuff that comes off to the group of that moment as strange and irregular. Now listen to the story. Look at what happens. Um, the counselor talks to the kid and whatnot, and suddenly like calls the mother before the mother comes into the room. Just the counselor leaves the room, and before like the mother can see the counselor turn on the radio where there's music, okay, and comes out and tells the mother, peep out of the door and look at what your kid does. Okay, the counselor was like kind of smart, very smart, and he says, look at what your kid does. And so what happens is the mother looks at this kid who she was so worried that she had to kind of like get pill drugs and psychiatric kind of stuff to make her normal. Look at this, listen to this. And so what happens is that the mother suddenly looks, even the counselor's looking interested, and suddenly the kid starts dancing. It was as if there was the soul of a dancer in that human being. Okay? And when I say soul, I mean the attention moves with a uniqueness that is its own reverence. It's like when you see a great performance, not only does the performer bow, but so does the audience. The true art of gratefulness has been lost by civilization. It hasn't been lost, but it's just people do not understand morality. It requires the response of a freedom that permeates all. Do you know? Imagine when we see in movies an alien kind of extraterrestrial kind of fleet coming and trying to take over other planets or whatever, like extraterrestrial warfare. And so that's one way, but we never see the opposite, where there's this sort of extraterrestrial enlightenment. And so this idea fascinated me to such a degree. I know I'm going a bit off here, but I want to just tell you that there are so many hidden archetypes. There is so many ways that the world is divided by the attention in the moment that just to study the attention is like discovering the cause of the effect, because you don't realize how you pay attention to something can change its meaning, even the duration of your attention. I am telling you, like, just look at your problem. Imagine, like, this is an approach to solving problems that I think incredibly works. And so this approach is just look at the problem. You don't want to approach it, you don't want to solve it. You're like an outsider, like a person from another, like this traveler who's suddenly come to this village and suddenly notices a problem. Okay, like you are outside of the problem, just from a neutral state of mind, just looking at the problem. You have no opinion and you just look at it. And if you cultivate the ability to concentrate, concentration is so valuable that it's like the teacher says pay attention but never teaches the kid how to pay attention. There must come a new roar, an uproar in the educational system. I hope I live to see it. I hope I live to see sort of the responsibility of civilization to make sure its eyes are fully open. This means not only harmony must be, not only world peace must occur in an instant, but there's so much work after world peace that the civilization requires to do. Because the peacefulness of the world again creates the freedom, that the space for the phenomena to occur. The maps to the unconscious is to observe how consciousness is being. All enlightenment stories are the same, guys. Do you know? All of them. All states of liberation. Enlightenment is not an individual concept, so people think it only has to have a sort of unique way. You know, there's no unique way to climb a mountain, guys. You just find the way you can walk and you walk. It's like it's enlightenment is not just the person sitting in a cave for 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days, and suddenly being like, oh wow, I am like, I have seen the other side. Like, good for you, man, but you're on this side. It's as if we have to. Oh my God, is it raining? Oh my God, it's raining. I have to relocate, guys. Yo, guys, this episode features the sounds of Mother Nature. Okay. Henry David Thoreau has this quote where he says, "It's not what you're looking that matters, it's what you see." And when man looks in the mirror, it's not what he's looking at that matters, it's what he sees. So the potential of the value of the human life is in its potential. So in some sense, first your mind advances, then your body just is working with a field. It works in a field. Um, it's kind of strange. I don't know how to say it, but kind of like how a drop, it moves with the rhythm of the ocean once it's in the drop, once it's in the ocean. Uh, I'm going to share a story right now before we take another jab, take another attempt at, not attempt, but I'm going to dive into the whole unconscious conscious mind situation again, but I'm going to tell you a story as kind of like a playful intermission, you know. This story is about three generals. These three generals are hanging out like they're at a table, same table, drinking outside, like on some kind of like uh, mountain hill or something. And as they're there, it's like the three armies of the generals are there and all their troops and classes and whatnot. And so as these three generals are drinking, they're all drinking. One of the generals, suddenly it's like when three generals sit at the table, it's as if like three tigers on the same mountain. You know, they all want the mountain to themselves. Um, so what happens is one of the generals, as they're drinking, taking more shots, you know, they suddenly, one of the generals says, let me show you two how loyal my men are. Let me just show you how brave, how courageous my troops are. So he's showing off to the two generals. And so the one of the generals responds, and the third one, who's much quieter, it just doesn't say anything. But the second one's like, "Okay, show us, prove to us this courage of your troops." And suddenly, that general suddenly says, "Soldier!" And a soldier runs in. One of his soldiers runs in, and he says, "Soldier, jump from this edge of this canyon to the other side of the canyon." And the soldier begins running and like a maniac just jumps and falls down and dies. And then the general is smiling. Okay, look at this general. He's smiling. And he looks at the other two. He's like, see, that's true bravery. That's true bravery. He knew he was gonna die, but he still jumped. That's true courage. That's what wins wars. And so the other two are watching, and the third one just is taking more shots than the other. The third one's like, okay, let me drink more while these two are discussing. And so what happens? What happens is that the second one says, let me show you true bravery. That's nothing. Let me show. So the second one comes to challenge the first general, the second general. And so the second general says, soldier, and a soldier suddenly runs and, comes to him, one of his troops. And he says, soldier, you see that minefield? Go there and dance. Something like chaotic. And the soldier says, yes, sir. And just runs into the battlefield and starts dancing like a maniac. Okay? And the guy begins dancing, and suddenly one of his feet hit the mines. Okay? And that guy dies. Okay? It's like chaotic. And this general looks at him. He says, now let me tell you what you just witnessed, what level of true bravery you witnessed. Okay? That guy who just danced in the minefields, that soldier, he planted the mines there. So he had such bravery and such true determination that he was actually dancing in a minefield where he knew where all the mines was, and he was being so true to the the art of the dance that he stepped up. Something like that, okay? So suddenly he says that's true bravery. He danced and died without fear. Okay? And then the first general's like, that's impressive, Now, the third general is just quiet. And then the two generals suddenly look at the third general and is like, how about you? And the third general's like, nah, I'm good, man. The third general's like, no, I'm good. I have nothing to prove. My men are brave. And so those two say, no, you have to. They've kind of done it, kind of refined this mentality in the youth of the world. When there's two people involved in an efficiency, the third one doesn't want to miss out. So in some sense, so what happens is the third guy's just chilling, and they're like, no, you have to demonstrate. If you're a true general, if you are up to our level and par, you have to. Okay? And he's like, okay. He says, okay. And and this is where he's like, okay, and he's pretty drunk, the third general right now. He's like, oh, he says, soldier! And one of his soldiers comes. And that soldier says, yes, sir. And he looks at his soldier, he says, soldier, I have never asked you anything like this, but you have to do this. You have to demonstrate true bravery. Okay? And the soldier's like, what is it, sir? Okay. And so he says, you see that waterfall? Like there was a waterfall to the side of the mountain? He's like, you have to jump into that right now. You have to do it. Do it. He gives the command. The general was giving. And then this soldier looks at the general and says, I won't do anything stupid like that. And there's a moment of silence. And then the third general starts laughing. He starts laughing and he says, well done, soldier. And he dismisses the soldier. And then he looks at those two generals. He says, that's real bravery. He used his intelligence. That's real bravery. It wasn't just blind hard work. It was kind of like a kind of playful, not playful, but a sort of honor for clarity. It's very interesting because it's very hard to live for a changing world. Did you know? So your story has to change all the time or it will be left behind. There's a sort of, it's like similar to how different parts of the brain, it took different amount of years for them to kind of come into their evolutionary position. We find at the same time, just like the same thing going on with our political system, where how can I tell you? It's as if like politics is not updating as much as quick as the individuals who are changing in the system. That means the human beings are reaching a point in the evolution of their free will where they're starting to realize that if they abide by a sort of efficient law, then they don't have to worry about chaos, and so they walk freely in the world. Do you know how much incredible solutions of the world are just hiding in bunkers because the world's ears is occupied by the sound of bullets, by the sounds of unnecessary violence? I mean, like, trust me, this life is too rare. It's as if many people are like, oh my God, it's a miracle we exist, you know? And imagine a miracle eradicating or erasing another miracle because of emotional fluctuation. Isaac Asimov, this incredible scientist and writer, sci-fi writer, he had this saying. I saw it in a live interview of his on YouTube. I mean, like a video of him on YouTube, where he says violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. Honestly, I personally wouldn't consider the idea of world peace. The only reason I consider it is like a librarian. We need silence so that attention can flow at its advanced efficiency. We cannot avoid, you see, the free will live a part of your mind which emerges, like is this emergent property that is like this faculty. I don't want to even. It's very hard to give a word for it, but like this attention that is in an intelligent way here and is kind of being you, this intelligence, it is constantly like a caterpillar going in a cocoon and becoming a butterfly, like a similar process of change, shifting. Your attention holds the universes of language. A being who understands their attention will eventually realize silence and stillness to be the space where all phenomena emerges from. So I'll tell you, the greatest speakers have been silent the most. You see, silence has an interesting thing. It doesn't create subjective karma, and subjective karma is the implication that when you do something, it is not just it doesn't have just a physical value. It has a subjective value, as if like you're living two lives. There's a sort of physical outcome of uh, like living, and then there is a subjective outcome. The subjective outcome, we have concluded, it is only in the brain. That's where civilization is at. That's 2019. If people are hearing this like thousands of years from now somehow, I'll be like, this was 2019, where we felt the world was in matter. It's as if scientists say the atom is 99.9% empty space, then suddenly they say we evolved from particles of phenomena into being suddenly people. Do you see being an evolutionary pattern of expression, being a design of intelligent movement? For me, it's the mystery of the world. Let me tell you why. This is why I say there should be an evolutionary return to nature. This evolutionary return to nature, I'm just watching it like a person sitting on like you know far row corner of like a stadium, not the most expensive seat, but like in the back. Like I'll probably be I'm there kind of seeing the world, okay? And what I see in the world is that the attention of the human being is leading to various results. Many of these results are not interdependent, they're isolated. It's as if war occurs because two people can't live in the same world easily. Chaos emerges because order is forgotten. This has been the theme of many values of our history. This is the unique thing, okay? I find our 2019 is kind of like suddenly realizing like uh, we are experiencing a freedom which can be replaced by technology. I firmly believe this. I firmly believe, not in my lifetime, but I think like perhaps if civilization continues 1,000 years, the human being's animalistic desires are just naturally going to want to update itself to such a degree that your free will become God. So your free will occupy your attention. Free will is not just all of life, ladies and gentlemen. Free will is how the identity, how you are contained as a moment. What your free will is, in some sense, unknown being known now. It is that that's how we are intelligent. Before man went into the forest, he had to wonder what the forest was. He had to wonder what trees were. He had to wonder what the world meant to him. And when I say wonder, not with the sophistication of a conceptual, language is just, it's very funny. Language, right now in 2019, it's being, I said again, the era of ideal worship. You know, it hasn't ended yet. I find that the same way a camera zooms in and zooms out, as man's states of mind change, they become eventually zoomed in states or zoomed out states upon the physical reality. So this is a unique way I acknowledge reality. It is organized imagination. You see, you got to study the design of attention. You will eventually come to a conclusion. This is my Mr. Within's consideration, that it is attributeless. You're going to realize even the ancient hymns said it. That was my confirmation. I had certain attempts at it, certain uh, ways I had wondered about the world, and then I began to see these ancient traditions had asked the deep questions, because it's like, for me, any child who has been inspired towards uh, wanting to know about outer space is inspired by a wonder. Okay? That wonder is how the macrocosmic structure of reality is containing the microcosmic. Pretty much us looking at the world and being like, oh my God, everybody's experiencing gravity. You know? So it's like the field of intelligence applies to all that's in that field. So I feel stories, our egos, are the surfboards that consciousness uses to, in some sense, recalibrate this moment that is divided between a sort of unknown experience and a known kind of existence. Trust me, language, when it moves really fast, eventually classifies through geometrical structure. I personally like, it's very incredible because when I kind of like started talking about this, I felt like, oh my God, I don't think any person, even in any culture, has acknowledged this to this depth, that there is a geometrical dimension of existence, and that there's a geometrical dimension of existence where this geometry, this it's like this abstract geometry has rhythm. Do you understand what I mean by rhythm? It means like various intelligence patterns syncing or being in the same moment. Okay, so you suddenly see the glory of the world and the tragedy of the world are in the same place happening. You see all the thoughts you had, oh my God, in the past I was this, I was that. This is all in this moment you're having this. You see? So the attention and even the thoughts of, oh my God, the future, where will I go, what will happen, all these are momentary generations. So man finds himself, this is what I'm saying, this is something I'm saying, that we have to zoom out of the detail that truth is choosing to acknowledge itself. We have to generalize certain things that are causing war. We have to have, what that means is we have to have, this is what happens, guys. You see how we see in nature, like there's a lion and there's a gazelle, and the gazelle suddenly sees the lion, and the lion sees the gazelle, and the gazelle's like, oh my God, this lion is like, death. And so the lion's like, sorry, dude, this is nature's design. The lion chases the gazelle. The powerful conquer the weak. Complex systems keep the truth limited. There's many ways that the world is fighting for truth. It's hilarious. It's the language wars. The language wars and the blindness of ideal worship, and in the back of this stadium, this gladiator arena of ignorance of our species, where wars and these inefficient systems are allowed to live. Do you see? I am saying, like, violence should be internalized. This means that we can be free to have as much intensity as we want towards any structure of organization or discipline. The mind has an incredible way to duplicate itself. You see, it's like as if like the cells of the body copy themselves and eventually emerges, the fetus. So what I'm telling you is that this in life copies itself and becomes something more, and then that something more copies itself and then becomes something more. And so what I'm trying to tell you, there's that kind of relationship. I mean, unfortunately I don't know the exact technical way to say it, but definitely there's a medical term, and pretty much it's a cell dividing itself. Okay, and so as it divides itself, it suddenly has an aspect of it be able to have a relationship with itself. There's something I'm working on, a science fiction novel. I think I will only write one, but this is the biggest science fiction novel, and there's many volumes to it. But in this novel, it's all my critiques and kind of like all those inner values that in some sense, never come up in these talks. Not that they never come up, but it's like some comments I'm making which are like from a state of mind that I don't normally present. When I say state of mind, I don't normally present is that the mind changes. This is a truth, okay? Because the physical body is changing, and in some sense, the ideas the child has since its childhood till now has totally shifted. The child has gone through experiences. Some people use the word jaded, but like I use the thing, it's like the child has gone to the battlefield. Every moment in life can be seen in some sense uh, as a battlefield or a playground. To the great masters, it is seen as a playground. So when they look at reality, because they assume their egos have gone to some sort of subconscious greatness, it doesn't matter how their concept of themselves changes subconsciously. They are holding a value so deeply that it is governing them. Okay, so that you can come into a state of self-inquiry where the subconscious suddenly no longer is like this mysterious middle kind of realm between the unconscious and the conscious. It is a bridge. When your subconscious becomes a bridge, it in some sense means man, the human being, has understood that it accesses this vision of self it has. It in some sense evolves as it goes rhythmically with nature. Okay, to go rhythmically with nature means to see nature. To truly see nature means not to give any meaning to it, not to make any stories. It is just a silence attention that form is form. From the silent attention that form is form, as there is movement, the world turns. You see, it's as if like there was this Zen story. Uh, these three friends, they're just going like in the forest or whatever in the Zen story. And so what happens is suddenly one of them sees a flag in the distance above the trees, and he suddenly gets a thought, and he looks at his two friends and he says, "Guys," and his friends are like, "What up?" And his friends are like, "What?" And he says that, "You see that flag? I just got a thought. It's the flag that's moving, not the wind." And his friend suddenly, one of his other friend looks at him. It's like, "Wait a minute. No, it's the wind that's moving the flag." And so it's like this very profound existential paradox these kids have suddenly entered. Okay? And then the third friend looks and is observing all that is in display. And he suddenly says to the two friends, he says, "Guys, it's not the flag that's moving and it's not the wind. It's our mind that's moving." Do you see? Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see how I'm approaching it? Eventually, it comes to an unknown movement. What do you do with an unknown movement? You watch how knowledge occurs. Eventually, you as you sincerely walk in this life, as you live your life, and this, when I say your life, your true life is not. It cannot be contained in language and ideology. It's just your experiential audacity to engage life. Let me tell you this, it's very incredible. Um, if you were on a terrace and you could see something from the world, you would see that your mind has access to things that your physical existence doesn't have. That means if you consider that it's only you're just a physical entity, you have dismissed your imagination, and hence you will let logic and rationality, which are incredibly important. I'm not devaluing it, but I'm saying you will allow patterns, these algorithms, to in some sense begin governing things. So it becomes a sort of the same way the atheist in some sense says that the Inquisition kind of killed so many innocent people. Okay, I find that the notion that we put a fixed anything, any fixed idea on one thing, like it's like, let me tell you, I think scientists should make it easy for themselves and start piling up all their theories of like gravity 1.0, gravity 2.0, gravity 3.0, yeah, and just constantly going. Okay. The mind is the moment. The moment is where the movement of the mind is being acknowledged and observed. Eventually, as Swami Krishnananda says, once you truly, like really, see the inseparability of all your all the individual ways you've classified phenomena with all the cosmic, all the collective, all the macro way you've kind of classified phenomena, as you suddenly see their inseparability, this is kind of like the European Enlightenment, as Da Vinci would say, to develop a complete mind, study the science of art, he would say, study the science of art and the art of science. That means the inseparability of all worlds. It's one of those mythological tasks that I'm not even convinced that our educational system is ready for. Our educational system has to, in some sense, It's like chosen like a medic to help the economical system. Trust me, imagine, I just want you guys to just think about this. Imagine at a time of war, okay, suddenly a country went to war, let's say World War I, World War II. I want you to imagine what occurred in the educational system of a time like that. Suddenly, the country was like, holy shit, we're at war, so our children must learn how to fight. Do you see? It's as if they wanted to train soldiers because war could break out. So education was in some sense a military school. So the educational system is evolving from an old military school kind of structure to it. Okay? So this military school structure to it, oh my god, there's 11%. How do I finish this? Uh, The educational system must find what is valuable, and what is valuable has to have a consideration of the individual dimensions of people's experience and how their individual dimensions of experience create the world in a way where they function in a sort of collective mode of being. Okay? I got to say one last thing about the title, so I can't finish anything else I was saying. But I'm going to tell you this: the loneliness that saw, sometimes you might feel that there are forces, karmic forces, rejecting your will's extension, like expression. I've had moments where I felt the world was holding me back, but it's kind of a mode and a mentality where it's just walking in the opposite direction of the river. If you turn around, you suddenly go very quickly, you know? So, what I mean by that is that all moments of existence have a value if consciousness observes in ways where there is a sort of inspiration behind the vision. Study your eyes, study reality. Understand that the objectivity has a value, but it must be given value. So, your vision of your greatness is the paradise you're building on earth before you build it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. A species has a lifetime too. A civilization has a lifetime too. We must, as a civilization, understand we're not just 8 billion bodies, we're 8 billion plus growing, minds. Because we're 8 billion minds, that means we can all share a unique viewpoint on reality. So we all have access to some sort of unique ways that we are seeing things happen in life. If an honesty factor is added to this honesty factor will first be, it's as if honesty is not cool. Okay, you can't be honest in like society. Let me tell you why. You can't be honest or people will think you're naive. A friend of mine in Egypt told me this. Oh my god, 7%. He said that he acted very polite and the shopkeeper was like, this kid has no idea what the real world is. And so I don't know how to tell you, but every person has one opponent that Mr. Within is pretty much these talks are a suggestion how to approach this. Many people can tell you about things known, but only you can truly explore the unknown. Understand this and your creativity becomes your own road. The value of your life becomes the style of your living. Your eyes are open in many ways. They're open through a sort of unknown intelligence. This is why in neurology there's the hard problem and the easy problem of consciousness. These are in some sense mysteries in how the system is working. Integration, tolerance, and the emergence of clarity. What else does a civilization need? Much blessings and namaste.